It's Two for Tuesday. Today I would like to go over these two very special knives in my collection. These two knives have completely changed the way I think about how to put an edge on a knife. What is sharp? Can a knife be too sharp? What kinds of an edge can you put on? What type of media should you be using to sharpen a knife with? I worked on the farm through part of college and for about 20 years after college. Now, one of the things that I had to do, this is a wholesale nursery, so we dug a lot of trees. And when you're hand digging a tree, you have to shape the ball with the shovel, and then you cover it with burlap and you tie it with rope. So you're using all natural products, um, hemp rope and burlap. I remember never having a knife that would stay sharp very long. And Cold Steel released these. They released this lockback in San Mai 3 steel. And back in the day, this was all the rage. This was probably in the late 1980s. If I pick this up here, can you see the line that goes through here? It's hard to pick up on the camera. There, you can see part of it there, right along here. It's a 3-layer steel. It's very similar to the Faulknevens. I believe, if I remember right, the outer layer is 420 J2, and I don't know what the inner layer is. I don't think Cold Steel has ever made that public, what they used on their San Mai steel. And they still make San Mai steel today, but I know the core is different than it was back then. I know in the past they have used, I think, VG2, and they might use VG10 now, but I have no idea what this is. It might be, for all I know, it might be 440C or 440HC. But this knife, I would get it so hair-popping sharp, and it still is very sharp. And I'd take it out in the field, and I'd go to cut a piece of rope, and instead of cutting the rope, it would slide right off of it. But yet, I could shave with this knife. I couldn't understand why it would not cut through the rope like it should. Now, if I held the rope and just pushed, it would go through it, but it didn't stay sharp very long. It just seemed to get dull really fast. It lost that fine edge, that hair-popping edge, and once that was gone, this knife did not cut anymore. So for cutting natural materials like rope and burlap, this knife actually was about useless. And as you can see, this is still in good shape, and it didn't get that much use because I put it aside. I mean, this was a knife that I had really wanted, and I saved up to buy it. I remember back then, even this knife was about $120. And I was so happy to get a hold of it. And then I was so disappointed at its poor performance. Then one day, cleaning out an attic in one of the really old buildings, I found this knife. This is an old military issue lineman's knife. I don't know exactly when this dates back to, but my best guess is this knife was manufactured in the 1960s. It says TL-29 on it, and these evidently were very popular in the military. This knife has a carbon steel blade. As you can see, it's got a nice patina. It shows a lot of use. It has a lot of character. It had character when I first got it, but it gained a whole lot more character through my use of it. This knife, when I got it, was pretty dull. I cleaned it up, and I sharpened it on a 600 grit diamond stone. I then took this thing out in the field, and that same rope that the Cold Steel would not cut, this sliced through it like butter. Matter of fact, when you were slicing through it, it felt like it was just grabbing the fibers and ripping it apart. That's when it hit me. And I realized the difference between an edge that's borderline polished and an edge that's toothy, that's been left coarse. And the properties of these old carbon steels and how well they take and hold a toothy edge. This knife would stay sharp for a long time. This is the first knife that I was ever able to go a whole day with out in the field. I mean, making hundreds of cuts without sharpening it. And yes, it did have to be sharpened every single day, but this knife was just wonderful. One of the things I did to it is it did have a sharpening choil in it, and I ground the sharpening choil out. Because cutting things like rope and burlap, they would get stuck in that little groove, and then it wouldn't let you pull the knife through. So for that application, the sharpening choil was actually bad. It would be better to have a very small dull area right here and have the rest of the blade sharp, because your materials wouldn't get stuck there. These two knives taught me a very valuable lesson. Not only do you need to have the right steel, you need to have the right edge on the knife. It has to be sharpened for each specific purpose that you're going to use the knife for if you want optimum performance. It depends on what you're doing. If you're carving wood, the polished edge works great because it's a push cut. A polished edge excels at anything where you're pushing through to cut it. A toothy edge excels at tasks where you're pulling and you have a slicing motion. It's like having micro serrations, and it just tears and rips right through the material and cuts effortlessly. So think about that when you get your knives, and think about that for the application that you're going to use them for. Choose a steel that has the properties for the jobs that you do the most, and then choose the sharpening techniques that put the right edge on it for those tasks. Now, this is a lesson that I had to learn the hard way. So I hope this is helpful to someone out there in choosing the edge that you put on your knife and how you sharpen it. In the future, I'll make other videos on sharpening knives and how to put different kinds of edges on them. This knife here, it's still just beautiful. Let me get a piece of paper. Let's see where this knife is at. Okay, you see how that cuts? And the paper is very clean. Now let's try this other one. Can you hear it? You hear the difference? You can hear the difference in the cut. You can see the fibers that are sticking up on the paper. This cut is not clean at all. This knife made a much cleaner cut. You could hear it in the sound, and you could see it in the results. But still, if you were going to slice a loaf of bread, or a tomato, or vegetables, or cut up a steak, this knife in this condition will do the job far easier and with far less effort. I hope this helps some of you out there. See you on the next one.